Welcome to the Bitter Medicine Podcast, where it's all about Black empowerment. Our show focuses on Black news and entertainment, arts, science, economics, history, people, and strategies that uplift, empower, and motivate Africans within the diaspora. And now, your host, whose favorite color is black, Goku.
Welcome to the Bitter Medicine Podcast. I'm your host, Koku. And today, in this live stream episode, I want to discuss this paper titled Cultivating Consciousness Among Black Women, Black Nationalism, and Self-Esteem Revisited. And one of the reasons why I wanted to do this paper, and I haven't even read this paper except the abstract, but, you know, in the last episode or two, I mentioned, as far as curriculum building goes, that the mother, you know, our Black mothers are our first teacher, and that the education for Black liberation, for Black progress, begins at home. And so to have that be a reality, we will need to have the first teachers, the Black mothers, Black women. We would need them to be conscious to begin with. So this paper, from what I could tell, is what I would call a quote-unquote true scientific paper, in that it deals with you know, like a scientific experiment being created, etc. I don't know if this live stream is going through. I'm seeing an error. That really irks me when I see those kind of errors. But it's all good because I'm recording it onto my computer as well. So if the live stream doesn't work, if you're not receiving any of the data, that's fine. I'll record and I'll upload later. So, and, you know, it's not like I get hundreds of people in the live stream anyway, or thousands, much less. So, you know, either way, it'll be fine. So, yeah, so we're talking about this paper, and the reason why I want to look at this paper is because of the reasons I just mentioned before, that we need to develop consciousness in Black women, right? We need to make sure that they're conscious, so that they, being the first teachers of Black children, they pass on, they transmit that consciousness to their children. So let's get into the reading. Cultivating Consciousness Amongst Black Women, Black Nationalism, and Self-Esteem Revisited. And this is written by Sherry C. Eaton Jonathan N. Livingston of North Carolina Central University, Harriette Pipes McAdoo of Michigan State University. And this paper is from around like 2010. So it's been around for a little while. The abstract reads, the study was conducted to assess the relationship between political ideology and self-esteem among African American female college students. From a historically Black university, 164 women were sampled. A series of standard multiple regression were employed to assess the relationship between political ideology, age, and self-esteem. Results of the study indicated that Black nationalism was a significant predictor of self-esteem, and that age was not a significant predictor of Black nationalism. All right, so keep this in mind. All right, so the abstract is like a preview of the work that's been done, right? So you get a little preview of the outcome of the study. The findings of this study suggest that a political ideology may be predictive of well-being in African American women. Future research needs to assess the impact of maturation in the development of political ideology across the lifespan. Furthermore, research on Black women's political ideas may contribute to the literature and broaden our understanding of what factors precede a strong Black identity and subsequently affect psychological health. And, that's the thing I talked about a little bit last week, how important, last episode, how important self-esteem factors into Black empowerment, black nationalism, etc. You raise the self-esteem of young boys, for example, you'll find that they're less likely to become involved in the street gangs and in the worthless behaviors within Black society, right? And that's something you really want to cultivate. You want to cultivate self-esteem. So whenever you build a curriculum, right? Whenever you have a curriculum, whenever you have the transmitters of the curriculum, the teachers, everyone involved and everything involved needs to be about building self-esteem. That's the key. So this is why you always want to have positive images. This is why our enemies always show us negative images. They want to lower our self-esteem. And the sad, messed up part is, the sad, messed up part is that you've got Black folks who are out here telling you that the white supremacists are the best and smartest people on the planet. This is a major downfall, right? We have people in positions that, hundreds of thousands of folks look to and quote all the time, and they're saying that the white supremacists are the smartest people on the planet. That's Neely Fuller and Tariq Nasheed and all these people, right? White supremacists are the smartest people on the planet. You can't beat them. My thing is that you can beat them, but you have to be organized to beat them, right? Chris Rocks once said that his father, made this statement like, you ain't gonna beat a white person or whatever. And my thing is that that's true if you're unorganized, right? But provided that you're organized, you can beat these folks. And a big part of being able to beat someone is having the self-esteem to beat them. It's having a high enough self-esteem and faith in yourself to beat these folks, right? So I want you all to keep this in mind as we go forward about self-esteem and empowerment. Given the intersection of race, class, and social inequality in America, many social scientists question whether psychological health is possible for African Americans. In the 1960s, a number of studies found race-related attitudes to be positively related to healthier psychological outcomes in African Americans. Although these studies examined the relationship between racial attitudes and self-esteem, few studies have attempted to assess what ideological factors precede the development of a strong racial identity and how an individual's political ideology relates to psychological health. Research conducted during the height of the Black Power movement suggests that political consciousness was related to both racial identity and self-esteem. And African Americans were more politically conscious and more Black nationalists in their political ideology reported a more positive evaluation of themselves. Right? If you are out here divided as to who you are as far as your identity, you're likely to be doomed. So this is why, we have the mulatto problem, right? a child who's born to black and white parents who at some point in life is going to make a choice. And children aren't dumb. They're going to make the choice, right, that seems like the winning choice, right? Remember being a kid on the playground and they're picking teams and you got picked to be on someone's team who was just garbage, right? You remember how you felt bad about that, right? Like, children know you want to be on the winning side. And when children look at the world and look at their parents and look at, you know, a lot of times it's a black male actually, or you know, it's probably even black male and black female who are misogynists out there, and you know, they look at how that black parent is being dominated within the relationship as well as outside of it. They're going to choose the so-called winning side. And so that black child, that mixed child is not, I should say mixed child, that mixed child is not really going to be for black society. Hence the mulatto problem. You might look black, you may have black features, but, you know, you're not really down with us. You see what I'm saying? So, anyway, since the 1970s, few studies have focused on factors related to political orientation for African Americans and whether political orientation is associated with mental health. Studies that have been conducted have only focused on African American participation in the mainstream political process and not on political ideology or directives of African Americans may employ to address problems in their respective communities. You see, because these folks don't care about the problems in your community. Moreover, consistent with the times, many of the studies and writings were conducted and discussed from a primarily male perspective. Thus, very little is known about African American women's political ideology or whether their ideology is related to better psychological outcomes. Given the shifts in the racial political climate in America, for example, desegregation, employment, housing, and education, and the increasingly important roles of black women in leadership positions, an assessment of how these factors are related under current social and political themes may be needed. The purpose of this study was to assess whether a black nationalist political orientation is pervasive among young African American women and is related to better self-esteem in African American women. So this was the introduction. This is the background as to this study. Why are we doing this study? And the question is to look at if a black nationalist political orientation is pervasive among African American women, and does that have a relationship to better self-esteem in African American women? And a lot of things are pointed to as showing like low self-esteem in African women. So this study was done in 2010. Let's see what the study really looks at. But you know, like I had this conversation on Twitter with someone, right? Someone made this post that I guess it went viral or somewhat viral, and viral amongst, you know, people like myself. But this person was asking the question of was making a statement that, you know, the truth is black folks hate themselves, right? They hate their skin color. And you know, and that's the truth. But I'm just gonna turn off this streaming thing because it's just not working for some reason. But the reality is, you know, the reality is, like, I had to jump in there and say, look, man, that's not the case. You know, what the F are you talking about? And he came back and said, well, how many black women do you know that bleaching their skin and wearing wigs and all this kind of stuff. And my response to that was, listen, I don't know any black woman personally who's been bleaching their skin. Furthermore, women wear wigs for various reasons, right? And last of all, and I think this is the one that quieted him up because he never responded again. But last of all, a broken finger doesn't mean a broken arm, right? You break your pinky finger, that doesn't mean you broke your arm. So one person who's, messed up, one or two people who are messed up doesn't represent the whole of black society, right? There are people who liken this. Oh yeah, because he mentioned Michael Jackson, and I said Michael Jackson suffered from vitiligo. He didn't embrace his vitiligo like you see a lot of actual black women nowadays, and even some black men embracing it now. He didn't embrace it, and he had his reasons. He was in show business and this, that, and the other, where he's constantly being photographed. He didn't embrace it, and so he skin lightened to blend, right? So don't come out here and talk about black people just hate themselves and all this old foolishness. But you see, the problem is you do have some people who have low self-esteem in their blackness. And what I'll be curious to know, if there's a study, perhaps this one or others, that looks at the similar question, right? If you have a black nationalist perspective, right? Are you less inclined to be, bleaching your skin, perming your hair, or wearing wearing European wigs or what have you? Right? And I would venture to say probably yeah. But I've seen women who are, at least they speak of consciousness, and they do all this other stuff, right? The perming and all this type of stuff. So, I'll be curious to see what that study would look like. But anyway, to continue. Black nationalism. Active resistance to the various forms of racism and oppression has been consistent in the lives of people of African descent in this country. Throughout the history of black protests, Africans have engaged in various forms of activism and resistance. This activism and resistance have been influenced by various social political ideologies concerning how people of African descent should best approach the racist conditions in which they exist. Although there have been a number of political and ideological positions that have dictated and undergirded the responses of racism of people of African descent, a black nationalist or race-first response to racism and oppression has been consistent throughout the history of black protests. And that's it right there. When you're race first, that means you'll do stuff for your race first. You'll be about your race first. And this is why the curriculum thing keeps coming up out of my mouth, because I think this is it. This is the way, if you want to talk about black leadership is lacking, get them a black curriculum and you'll see within a generation's time, black leadership changes. It improves. You want to talk about local problems, that last time I spoke a lot about Flint and the water crisis, and that if the black folks were educated to solve problems around them, they could have solved that problem themselves. You see? There was one brother, I think I forgot to mention this last week, there was a brother who had donated some machines he built, a black man. Built these machines that makes water out of the air. Right? And that's cool and all, but if I had to guess, that machine uses up a lot of energy to do it. But if we get children from young working on ideas, right? Working on, solving problems around them, right? You won't be suffering in Flint since Obama. I mean, we're talking over 5 years now that these folks haven't had clean water. And Trump came in there, and Trump didn't do a damn for these folks, right? What do you have to lose? Well, you could lose everything, right? Support curriculum that seeks to establish problem solvers and leaders in your community. That's the only thing we can do right now. That's the greatest thing we can do right now. You could go back to Africa right now, but if you don't have something to give when you get to the continent, you're just you're just um, you're just increasing the population. You want to go back and be able to solve problems. And right now, wherever you are in the diaspora, you have the opportunity to learn how to solve some of these ordinary problems that happen in nations. Go back to the continent now. We will be able to fix our own problems. We don't have to rely on anyone. Think about, and this is the last thing I said before I continue. Think about like all the loans and stuff Africa takes from these different, the IMFs or the Chinese and this, that, and the other. And the Chinese are coming in, and doing stuff because who else is doing it? They built a bridge and this, that. Who else was building the bridge? You see, and that's a failing on our part. African country needs a bridge that will, help access farms and this, that, and that. We're supposed to be building that stuff, not the Chinese. So of course we owe them heavily when they do this stuff and we accept it. We should have been doing it, and that's something we as black folks need to really sit down and self-evaluate ourselves about. We unfortunately have this mentality that someone's supposed to fix our problems for us. Oh, we was enslaved. We built this shit, but you're not fixing your problems. You have to fix those problems. Stop waiting on someone. If someone else has to fix your problems, the cost is going to be great. And we see that going on in the continent. If the continent was fixing all of its problems, you could get most of those countries, those multinational countries in Africa, that's bleeding resources and brain draining you could get those up out of it. I gave an example a couple of weeks ago in the Bahamas. They found some oil a couple of years back. And the deal that the government struck with, I can't remember who the company was. One of these companies that's good at mining, drilling for oil and stuff. They came up with a deal that was 88-12. Guess who got the 12? And the oil is in your land. The oil is in our land. It's in our nation. And as I said then, I'll say it again. I would have preferred the government to say, hey, you know what? 88-12? No, that's my death. I would prefer sit on that, raise up a generation of students who are going to go into, into the areas pertinent to drilling for oil, to finding, new solutions for taking oil up out of the earth, right? I would have preferred you do that, put aside some money so that when these guys reach age, there's money to purchase the equipment, right? It's a long haul thing, right? It's a long game, but because you're playing the short game, you're getting 12 cents on the dollar for oil that's in your land. Anyway, this stream is in and out. I think I have some viewers, but I'm not certain how well the stream is going for them. I'll just continue and then I'll upload the recording that I'm making of this episode. Nkrumah in 1970 defined black nationalist ideology as a set of principles drawn from the culture and history of black people, which provides insight into the causes of past and present situations of black people, as well as specific economic and political guidelines for future actions and objectives for black people. A review of black protest literature suggests that individuals who consider themselves black nationalists believe that black people should possess their own country or land, right? Black nationalists are of the opinion that black people should share common heritage, language, culture, religion, way of life, and ethnicity, distinct from that of other groups. Black nationalists also believe that black people should govern themselves and shape their own destinies. Thus, black nationalists conclude that black people should be in control of their own social, economic, and political institutions. And again, Nkrumah was talking about this in 1970, right? Broderick, Rudwick, and Muir was talking about this in 1971. Like, that's longer than I've been born, right? 50 years ago. And so, to me, and this is what really kind of irks me with black organizations as they currently are. Black organizations as they currently are, to me, are just a bunch of talking, a bunch of protesting, and more talking. Right? And, you know, maybe some of that is okay. But to me, at this point, I think we're past that. To sound like Jay-Z, I think we're past that now. I think we have enough literature and knowledge about what we need to do. It's time to start doing something. And I'm talking about direct activities, right? That's going to cause a direct and more so immediate change, right? And this is why I keep talking about this education stuff. The sooner you're educating your people to solve problems around you, the sooner you'll see problems around you solved. Put down a t-shirt, right? To continue. Measuring black nationalism. Early attempts by social scientists to measure black nationalist ideology began with the construction of scales to evaluate the relationship between student activism and black consciousness in the 1960s. Cross, Parham, and Helms in 1991 suggested that an interest in black awareness or black consciousness was influenced by the changing attitudes of African Americans, which were influenced by the social and political developments in America in the 1960s. To measure the change of levels of awareness in African Americans. So by the way, they're saying that like what the BPP and stuff were doing in the, during the CRM, like what the Black Panther Party, what the civil rights movements, King, Malcolm, even the Nation, etc. What those groups were doing in the 60s, right? 30 years later had an influence on the attitudes of African Americans. You see how important what you do today. See, that's another thing black folks got to come off of. We're doing stuff for ourselves today. No, what you do today influences the future. It was the same thing with the crack epidemic. The crack a lot of those mothers and fathers and stuff were doing back in the day had a bunch of kids about a decade ago who were out here just messed up. What you do today influences the future, influences the attitudes of our people in the future. And so that's why you need to join me today. That's why you need to go ask Only Say or Melanated Conscious Society. What are they doing? Those guys are organizing. What are they doing? How can I help? Because the stuff that we do today is going to make a difference, if it's positive, in 2050. I might not even be here 30 years from now. Some of you listening might not be here 30 years from now. I hope we all are. So let's make it, let's do something good today for 30 years from now. To measure the changes and levels of awareness in African Americans, H. Banks in 1970 devised the Black Consciousness Scale. Highlight that so I can look that up, right? Which has two components: a racial awareness and a keen systems understanding, and B, the degree to which one benefits, the degree to which one identifies with the African American community, right? So these are American Black nationalist type stuff, right? Because it's all about the African American community, right? Further efforts to operationalize Black nationalism were undertaken by Lessing and Zagorin in 1970, and Harold, Malone Cologne, and Harris in 1996 in the constructions of the Black Power ideology scale and the Black nationalism scale, respectively. According to Maish, 1977, and Harold et al., unlike the Black consciousness scale, both measures capture the complexity of Black nationalism and embody a full nationalist thrust. Thus, both measures assess the political and economic dimensions of nationalism, a need for group solidarity and community action, and the social awareness and systems understanding essential to a Black nationalist ideological stance. Again, like, we've had this information going on for so long now, and we're still talking about this type of stuff. Lessings in 1973 found that Black high school students who were high in Black power orientation and endorsed Black nationalist philosophy, as measured by the Black Power ideology scale, reported significantly higher self-concept scores. Maish found that higher scores on nationalism were associated with higher scores on a tendency self-concept scale among African Americans. What is that? Look that up. Additionally, she found that higher Black nationalism scores were positively correlated with higher scores in psychological competence. For example, coping, goal setting, initiative, ability to plan, and a sense of self-efficacy. Now, here's the thing. We have this information out since like 96 at least, right? And what are we doing to incorporate this information into, like, what I've been talking about, right? Which is curriculum, right? What are we doing, right? And as we're building this curriculum, with the Bit of Edison podcast, right? That's our project, right? As we're building this, we have to go back to all of these self-concept scales and all these measurements of Black nationalism. And we have to incorporate the findings from these studies, from these scales of measurement, right, into the work that we're doing. Because clearly, the outcomes are worth it. Don't you think our people need coping, better coping skills, better goal setting, more initiative, the ability to plan, a sense of self-efficacy, of doing? Like, this is what we need. We have the information. We're just not doing anything. We're still talking. Man, seriously, if you've been following these episodes and you agree with what I'm talking about, don't just sit quietly and nodding your head in agreement. Ask, how can I help? Because this is the kind of thing you really need help for it to be more robust, so to speak. I can do something, but me doing it alone, I'm going to overlook stuff probably, and I should have stated something here, but a few more ideas, a few more people working on different aspects of things and being able to give a second eye to things that have been worked out. Like, that's what we need. That's the doing part. The next part of the doing is getting out there to some families and within our community and having them report back how it's going. What changes do you see in your children? Is it proving better a curriculum than what the children are getting in their public school education? Which I'm sure it will. It will. Stop sitting down talking all the time. I get the impression with a lot of Black organizations, we just like coming together and talk. Let's stop talking all the time. A more contemporary investigation of nationalism and race-related ideology by Smith, Burlew, and Lundgren in 1991, assessing the relationship between black consciousness, self-esteem, and satisfaction with physical appearance amongst African American female college students, found that the development of black consciousness was positively correlated with self-esteem. Right? African American female college students who scored high in the pre-consciousness stage, characterized by low systems understanding and a lack of adherence to black nationalist ideology, exhibited lower levels of self-esteem than did African American female students who had high scores in the confrontation stage, characterized by a rejection of mainstream ideology and acceptance of black nationalism. This is it. This is it right here. All right. And again, this is the background information. So when you do a scientific study, right, first thing you do is you ask a question, and then you do your background research to see what has been done in the area, what were the outcomes. All right, and this is describing the background research, giving you the references that you could go and read the papers yourself if you are so inclined, right? And then after they do this, they'll set up a hypothesis, right? This is called a scientific method. They'll set up a hypothesis that usually goes along the lines of if then this, right? Or if this then that. Right? It's usually an if-then statement, right? If such and such is the case, then we should see this thing because of this, right? This is what we need to carry through our lives. I did an episode a while back talking about we need to really go about organizing and the way of life in a more scientific way. This is how you do science. Ask a question, observe it, come up with a hypothesis, an if-then statement, and I like to tell students if-then because, right? Then design your experiment. So later on, I'm sure in this paper, we'll see where they design an experiment. Further support can be found in the study by Sellers, Smith, Shelton, Rowley, and Chavez in 1998. Investigating the multidimensional nature of racial identity and its relationship to self-esteem. Researchers in the study found that African American college students who were more nationalistic in their political orientation felt that race was important to their self-concept, right, racial central, and had positive views of blacks as a collective, with God. Both dimensions of racial identity were related to higher levels of self-esteem. So now let's talk about self-esteem. Let's take a quick station ID before we continue with self-esteem.
You are listening to the Bitter Medicine Podcast on KWAZ Radio.
This is DAX. You tune into the Harsh Reality Podcast, providing you with social commentary on the news affecting our community, only on KWAZ Radio.
Peace, family. This is Oni, inviting you to listen to the pro-black perspective, where black problems are addressed with black solutions.
You are listening to the Bitter Medicine Podcast on KWAZ Radio.
We're back. Take a brief break there, station ID break. Remember, follow KWAZ Radio on social media, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. And follow all those guys from the Harsh Reality Podcast, the Pro-Black Perspective. And of course, make sure to like and subscribe to our podcast. Make sure to hit the bell so that you'll be notified when I'm going live. It'd be nice to get more people to jump on the lives, to post questions, post thoughts, and we can have a little bit of a dialogue, while the readings are going on or while the episode is going on, right? So make sure, give me a thumbs up. That helps me a lot. If you haven't subscribed, make sure to subscribe, and in the future, and also hit the bell so that in the future you too can jump on, and we can have a little bit more fun with dialogue here. And do the same thing for the rest of the guys and gals on KWAZ Radio. I also forgot to mention the Queen's Counsel, Sharice. She does more so a live video show. The last episode she did was awesome. When she had a special guest, a co-host on. I'm looking forward to what she does next. Make sure to tune into her show as well. Okay? And by tuning in, I heard Onitase mention this the other day on one of his live streams. When you tune in, and you could tune in, you could see some people in the comments, right? Or you could see where people are engaging you, even if not in the live stream comments, but later on in the comments on YouTube or on social media. That encourages us to keep doing this. But when we tune in and we look at the concurrent views, and I know today I have a bad streaming situation going on as far as YouTube, but I'm recording the show, so it'll be fine when I upload the recording. But like 0 concurrent views. At one point it was like 1 or 2 or something like that. But to talk to yourself can be cool, but to talk to yourself on a podcast is not as fun. Especially when it's right there for you guys to talk, to speak to. And one of the things I want to do in the future, as I learn this new little setup I have going on here, I'm liking the live streams more than when I had to record. When I had to record, it was a process. I had to record it to a field recorder, take the field recorder to a computer, upload it to a program to edit it. I kind of like to be able to just jump on, hit record, hit stream, and voila, here's an episode, right? But in the future, I'd like to actually have people call in. But why would I even go through the motions of getting people to call in or whatever, right? Or join in via maybe something like Discord or something like that, or Google Hangouts. Like, why would I do that if when I look at my live streams and there's literally no one listening, right? Anyway, just some things to keep in mind. We're trying to build something here, not just me, KWAZ Radio, but every one of us should be trying to build something, trying to do something today that will resonate 30 years from now, right? Self-esteem. Self-esteem, speaking of self-esteem, when you have 0 views, self-esteem, a dimension of self-concept, is defined as an individual's subjective evaluation of the self. Self-esteem includes one's feelings of self-worth, one's judgment, and perceptions of one's value, morals, and personal attitude. Many of the early investigations of African American psychological development and well-being focused on Black self-esteem. The early studies on Black psychological functioning, consistent with the prevailing perceptions of Black people as a collective, suggested that African Americans idealized whites and suffered from low self-esteem. And to hear that just breaks my heart. Truly. To hear that just breaks my heart. Now, these studies were done in a time, because you can see this paper is from 1951, right, in which they got this bit of info from, right? Now, this was done, you got to understand, this was done closer to Jim Crow. This stuff was done, those studies were done closer to Jim Crow, in fact, in Jim Crow still, and less than 100 years after the emancipation of Africans in America. So I would understand. I can understand, but I'm still saddened by just reading it. Right? I can understand how some, if not a lot, of Black African Americans idealize whites, right? Because they were just recently, not too long out of slavery, and still suffering through Jim Crow, right? Many of the early studies on black self-esteem were influenced by Charles Cooley's 1902 Social Looking Glass and George Mead's 1934 Generalized Significant Others, models of self-conflict, to support the idea that the individual's concept of self arises through interactions with other members of the community. Yeah, I mean, if people are stringing you up in trees, burning crosses on your front step, running you out of your off of your land and out of your community, you won't feel too good about yourself. Even though it was for survival, you still won't feel too good that this is what I have to do. Right? The widely held notion that African Americans suffer from low self-esteem went unchallenged until the late 1960s and early 1970s, when researchers challenged this assumption on conceptual and methodological grounds. Right? And McAdoo in 1974 cited the inability of the early researchers to use multiple methods and to include a sufficient number of African Americans in the creation and standardization of their measures. So when you do an experiment, right, you need a certain amount of subjects in the experiment for the results to be plausible, for the results to have any weight to them. So like one time ago, I used to work in a rodent lab, and we did experiments on, using rodents as the research model. Rodents are a model organism. So we never did a study we never did a true study that had below 20 rodents in the study. Never. If we did a pilot study just to see, just to work out the mechanics of the actual study, yeah, you might use like 8 animals or something like that, right? But in any research that you intend to put out there, you should have a good enough sample size of participants. And so what they're saying here, I still don't think they're really challenging the outcome as much as the methodology, right? I mean, it's true. If your subjects are small and you take it from a small sample size, let's say you took everyone from the same apartment building, right, who live in the same community and who probably live under the same or similar circumstances, then yeah, they probably might all have the same opinions of themselves. Versus if you took a large sample size of, let's say of America, right? Let's say you took 100 participants from all over the U.S., the numbers might change, right? So I guess, they are actually looking at the outcome of that study based on the low numbers of people who were involved in the study, right? But I have a suspicion that most people will still feel like that when it comes to white folks during the time that these studies were done in the early 50s, late 40s actually, right? Most recent studies on black self-esteem, utilizing scales normed on black populations, greatly challenged the earlier position taken by social scientists. Recent studies have found that blacks may use the black community as a context for social comparison, and that African American children have self-esteem that is equal to or higher than that of their white counterparts. That African American children have self-esteem that is equal to or higher than that of their white counterparts. Interesting. Right? The literature on African American self-esteem and self-concept suggests that positive mental health for black people may be related to their understanding the system's impact on black people and their active resistance to those impingements on their lives. So like, sometimes we talk about people who have their head in the bubble, right? You could find right now in black society, they have their head in a bubble. They don't see what's being enacted upon them. And the old saying says that ignorance is bliss. Their ignorance has them, they're cool. Not to stereotype, but just to use, common examples that we're all aware of. But like the dudes out here who could drink whatever they want to drink, screw whatever they want to screw, wear what they want to wear, wear the Jordans, drink a little Henny, screw some nice looking, black women around the way. They're good. The belly's full, the body's dressed, they have a bed they can go and lay in, and a woman in it. They're cool. They're not really worried about the demise, right? Or the impending demise of African people. That's a serious thing. So yeah, their self-esteem may be high. It's because they're not connected, right? Although a number of studies conducted during the 60s and early 70s found that African American men who were more race first in their political orientation had better psychological outcomes, few contemporary studies have been focused on African American women's political orientation and how it affects or is associated with positive psychological outcome. You see this little piece I just read here? This tells me that I'm almost assured that the researchers here asked this question, but the question was more about black society, meaning both men and women. And then they realized that, well, black men were looked at, but there's a gap. Black women weren't studied in the same way. And so this is how they came up with their, and I tell this to students all the time. Ask a question, do your background research. You'll find that people may have asked the same or similar questions to you. But if you read through the literature, you could very well find a gap what they didn't think about it, right? They didn't think about, like those guys who did the research that looked at black men at the time didn't regard black women probably. Here comes these researchers, and they're able to fill a gap and say, no, well, let's look at what the deal is with black women. The purpose of this study is to assess what factors are conducive to the development of positive self-esteem in African American women, and whether nationalist political ideology leads to a strong racial identity and is related to self-esteem. Such an investigation may not only provide insight into the relationship between black political orientation and psychological well-being, but may also shed light on the degree to which the development of a black nationalist or race-first orientation protects self-esteem in African American women. So we see the purpose of this study: to assess what factors are conducive to the development of positive self-esteem in African American women. Right? So if this, then this, and whether nationalist political ideology leads to a strong racial identity and is related to self-esteem. Right? So in here is the purpose of the study. So methods.
You are listening to the Bitter Medicine Podcast on KWAZ Radio.
So methods. Participants, right? Data were collected from a sample of 164 African American women from a historically black university in the Southeast. The majority of the women in the study were between ages of 18 and 29, right? Median age then was about 19.93. Standard deviation was about 2.89. So that means 2.89 years above 1993 or 2.89 below, right? It's a range. So of the participants, 24% were freshmen, 40% were sophomores, 26.4% were juniors, and 6.7% were seniors. With regards to mainstream political participation, 67.7% indicated that the Democratic Party best represented their political affiliation. Is there any surprise, right? Is there any surprise that it's, majority Democratic, right? Fewer than 1% indicated that the Republican Party best represented their political beliefs. Any surprise? No. And it could be argued that the Democratic Party, even though they do ignore the needs of their base, but that's a whole other discussion, because I think the base also ignores that you have to be fully engaged in the political system. I'm not saying that these, Democrats or Republicans or whatever are going to fix your situation. But what I'm saying is, if you want to get anything out of them, you got to learn to play the game. I always talk about playing the game. And the game starts the day after a new election, right? And that's what black folks don't understand. You guys want to come up and start talking big shit, around now, September and October, or during the year of the actual election. That's too late to start talking about your demands this and demands that. Your demands have to be, like, for example, and I'm going to segue here for a second, but like in the current presidential race, it's between Biden now and Trump for a second term. I don't want to see Trump in for another term, but I know Biden is a piece of shit also. However, when you play the game that you're supposed to play, and this should have happened from under Obama. You were supposed to be demanding, like you were supposed to be able to go to Obama from every year. You wanted to see these 10 things done. Year 2, these 10 things done. And the message should have been clear messaging to Obama and them. You don't do this stuff in year 1, 2, 3, and 4. You're going to be up out of here. We will vote otherwise to get y'all up out of here. If y'all want your chance at power, right? And I talked about this in previous episodes or social media postings. A lot of this stuff really is about them guys getting their chance at making money. A lot of this politics stuff is those guys getting in there, making the deals under the table. I come from a small country. I could tell you that's how it works. Because in a smaller country, you get to see it up close and personal. It's really about those guys getting in there and making deals that they can make with pharmaceuticals, with Chinese, Russians, whoever, and they make their dough, right? And, if you give them the chance to do that, then they should do something for you in return. This is why you do have to kind of barter your vote, right? But to expect that any one party will do your bidding is kind of foolish. You're supposed to, as a matter of fact, you're supposed to have demands from both parties, as well as any independent group, even though, in America it's really a two-party system, right? But you're supposed to have demands for either. And the people who are doing the work for you from one year to the next, leading up to an election, that's who you vote for, right? So when asked about community or campus involvement, only 20.1% indicated that they were involved in organizations that address economic and social concerns in the African American community. And I've always had a problem with this. When I was in college, and it happened like in my last year too, we organized to create a new group on campus called Uhuru Sasa. And Uhuru Sasa, and those of you listening who are familiar with what I'm talking about, who know me and familiar with that time, it was such a difficult time to get people to come. We got more people involved than we probably expected. And we actually put on like the Black History Month events and got good turnouts. We got good speakers. And but in terms of like participation on a college campus, very low turnout. And it didn't help that we were in largely a commuter school. So, people were just coming on campus just to do their classes and kind of bounce, go to work, go home, or what have you. But yeah, I feel, especially in these historically black colleges and universities, uh, the participation in some type of organization needs to start there. I think all the students, as much as, it shouldn't be 20, it should be more like 80, right? Should be involved in organization. In some organization where it's female led or male led or co-ed, whatever, but they should be involved in some organization. Procedure. Participants in the study were sampled from undergraduate psychology courses to collect, undergraduate psychology. Oh boy. Anyway, psychology students are some of the. Anyway, let's just leave that alone. To collect data for the study. A letter explaining the purpose of the study was sent to the chair of the department. Subsequent calls and meetings were established with professors in the department to answer any questions regarding the study, and times were arranged for data collection. Once permission to solicit data was secured, students were given the questionnaire during class. Students were told the nature and purpose of the study and informed that all information provided was confidential and that their participation was voluntary. Once students had completed the surveys and placed them in an envelope, they were debriefed and asked if they had any questions. Students who participated in the study were provided extra credit by their professor for participation. So this is like common procedure for these types of studies in a college campus, right? In fact, it's not uncommon sometimes, depending on the length or the time that you have to invest in the study, it's not uncommon to actually be paid $20 or something like that to do these studies. But typically, you do it for some credit, right? Especially in psychology. In psychology, they always have these studies. Some psychology professor has the study going on, so he tells the intro psychology instructors to put out there that I have these studies, and they get credit for it for the class, right? Measures. What did they measure? Well, demographic. Demographic information collected from the participants assessed age, grade level, parental education level, family annual income, racial composition of previous high school, and community, urban, or rural orientation, campus and community involvement, and political affiliation. That's good stuff to gather, right? That's not dissimilar information that you'll want to gather from creating a new curriculum, right? Because if you come from, let's say you come from a family with a high annual income, your ideology on race will likely be totally different from someone from a low annual income. You come from a family with a high annual income, and let's talk about curriculum now. And you receive this supplementary curriculum that we're building. Outcomes might not be as high with a family with a high annual income as with a family with a low annual income. So this is good information so that you could parse out the results better, right? Self-esteem. Self-esteem was examined using Taylor's inventory of self-esteem. Right? Taylor's inventory of self-esteem is a 16-item instrument consisting of items that measure respondents' acceptance of self and personal regard. The scale was created and revised from a random sample of 444 participants, of which 84% were African American. The stability of the Taylor's inventory of self-esteem was evaluated by Wilson in 1985, who reported a 4-month retest reliability of 0.93, so 93%. Participants were instructed to respond in a Likert type format ranging from 0, never, to 8, always. Examples of items include I feel happy inside. So then you would respond 0, never, to 8, always. Hopefully you would respond 8. I am satisfied with the kind of person I am. Again, hopefully something close to 8. And I have a sense of purpose. Again, 8. Right? That's the hopes, right? Again, and if you're from a high income family, you probably will score, you probably would self-report, responses closer to 8. Whereas from a low income family, it might be lower. Or it might be reversed. Sometimes you're from a high income family, your parents don't really check for you that much because they're out here trying to make this money or whatever. So maybe you don't feel happy. So, this is good because, again, it helps you parse out the information. Right? Scores on this particular scale were summed, added, and higher scores of the measure represented higher levels of self-esteem. Black nationalism. The Black Power ideology scale, originally a 36-item scale questionnaire, was developed by Lessing and Zager in 1970 to investigate the extent to which the endorsement of a Black Power ideology was associated with the attitudes and behaviors it sought to promote, such as positive self-attitude, efficacy, and group solidarity. The scale consists of 36 items answerable on a 5-point Likert type scale of the alternatives strongly agree, don't know, disagree, and strongly disagree. So it's a range from strongly agree, basically, to strongly disagree and everything in between. The Black Power ideology scale contains 5 subscales reflecting theoretical components of a Black nationalist ideological position. A, Black culture and Black identity. B, political and economic focus. C, militancy. D, group solidarity versus individualism. And E, separatism versus integration. Now, I'll say something about this. This is great stuff, but the problem that can arise, and I know that they signed a waiver saying that this was confidential, but this is the kind of stuff that can be used to determine by your oppressor. So this is why you gotta be careful who's putting on these. You gotta be careful who's putting on these research events. Let's say one of our enemies puts this on. Our enemy could get a good idea what level of militancy the educated college students are, right? How much group solidarity exists, right? And are they separatist or integrationist? Your oppressor wants you to be integrationist minded, right? Once you go get out here and you're known to be separatist, right, and you have a big enough voice, don't be surprised if them alphabet people don't come and look for you, right? So you got to be careful who's putting on these kinds of research, okay? If it ain't black, that shit is whack, right? Lessing in 73 reported that the test-retest reliability coefficient was 0.88. For the purpose of the present study, a reduced 14-item version of the scale, employing items representing Black culture and identity, political and economic solidarity, and affirmative community action were used, right? Items reflecting separatist and so-called militant responses to racism were omitted because this study you would be presenting this data, and these people are black people who are doing this study. You don't want to put out there, right? You don't want to do the research for your enemy and put out there what percent of our people are militant, what percent are separatists. You see? But it would have been good for them to take it, and maybe they did, to have this information internally, right? Higher scores on the scales reflect an agreement with a nationalist or race-first political ideology. So the higher they score, the more race-first they were. So the results. Overall results indicate that nationalist ideology is related to self-esteem among African American female college students. Pearson product moment correlations were calculated to evaluate the bivariate relationships among the variables, right, and key demographic variables. Black nationalism, so they refer us to Table 1. We'll come back to that. Black nationalism was related such that African American women with higher nationalism scores reported higher levels of self-esteem. Let's see how they organize the data here. Right, so let's see. So you see they parsed it out. Mother's education, father's education, racial composition, age, self-esteem, nationalism. Right? And this table is looking at the mean, standard deviations, and Pearson product correlation of racial identity, nationalism, and self-esteem. You know, I'm going to post this as a question on social media. I want to see if you guys can pick out the information in this table. But that's the thing about like research. Tables and graphs are visual aids that show you the results and how the results relate to the hypothesis, the original hypothesis you created before running this, before running this experiment, before testing the hypothesis with an experiment. And so the better studies that can better provide the visual aid and relate it back to our hypothesis tend to be the better papers, right? And overall, the better studies. Okay, but let's go back to the information as it's stated up there. Given the significance of age in much of the racial identity literature and its importance in psychological health and maturation, Pearson product moment correlations were run for age. Age was significantly related to both Black nationalism and self-esteem. There were no significant relationships found for parental education or racial composition of high school. Which is kind of interesting. There was no significant relationships found for parental education or racial composition of high school. So it means that the higher the education the parents had didn't matter when it came to these females and their sense of nationalism and self-esteem. Predicting self-esteem and the influence of age. To examine best predictors of self-esteem, nationalism was regressed on self-esteem, controlling for the effects of age. The overall model explains 7% of the variance in self-esteem. Controlling for the effects of age, Black nationalism significantly predicted self-esteem. An African American, I'm going to do a separate show on this data so we could explain. As an African American female college student who were more nationalist in their political ideology report higher self-esteem. Right? Remember when James Brown? I'm sure you guys have seen the video. when James Brown and during the Black Power movement, he had that chant, "I'm black and I'm proud." You know, like that. The whole idea behind what James was trying to do there. A lot of people miss. A lot of people miss some of the contributions James Brown had, but James was telling you back then to be black and to be proud, to associate the two things, right? And that's been a mantra ever since the 70s. I'm black and I'm proud, right? We've had our children saying it for decades now, right? Because we understand that being race first is supposed to raise your esteem. Because let me tell you something. The Eurasians are raised first. And their esteem is through the roof. Some of you call that white supremacy. I call it more so ego and all that kind of stuff. Right? Go back, I did a show on ego some time ago. Go listen to that episode. Right? And you learn something. So after they give you the results and the numbers, they'll give you a discussion. And in this discussion, as well as in the discussion, they should start to relate the numbers to kind of more tangible things that you could kind of more grasp, even if you're not, aware or fully understanding of the data. The purpose of this study was to examine the relationship between Black nationalism and self-esteem in African American female college students. I'm certain their hypothesis here was if Black American female students have a high rate of Black nationalism, then they should have higher self-esteem. I'm sure it's something along those lines, right? Given the preponderance of research on racial identity and psychological well-being, few contemporary investigations have assessed the relationship between political ideology and psychological well-being, right? So if you have a grounded political ideology in Black nationalism and self-esteem, Black is beautiful, for example, right? You should have a greater psychological well-being. The study found that Black nationalism was related to self-esteem and that nationalist ideology was positively correlated to age. Thus, Black women who were more nationalistic in the political ideology reported higher levels of self-esteem. Moreover, older female college students in the study reported higher nationalism scores than the younger female college students, right? That has to do with being, more ingrained. Given the social climate of many Black colleges in the South and having a higher probability of being taught by faculty that experience both the civil rights movement and Black Power movements, higher nationalism scores among older African American female students may be due to duration of enrollment and increased likelihood of taking classes in which they were exposed to nationalist sentiment and ideology. That's what I said. They were more ingrained. Right? They were more ingrained. They had a longer time in it than younger ones. These findings are consistent with the work of Maesh in 1977 in her investigation of the relationship between nationalist political ideology, activism, and mental health. She found that African Americans who were nationalists reported higher scores on the Tennessee Self-Concept Scale. Although the findings were significant, more investigations are needed given that very little research has been conducted in the relationship between political ideology and psychological outcomes. Furthermore, given that this was a college-age sample and a longitudinal design was not employed, further inquiry is needed. So more work needs to be done, right? More work needs to be done outside of the college-age sample. Is this true in high school? Is this true post-grad education or post-undergrad education? Is this true amongst 50-year-olds and 60-year-olds, etc.? Right? Given that the young women were sampled only from college psychology courses, the findings of the study may not be generalizable to a representative of all African American female college students or women in the broader community. And I agree with that. Further studies, because a lot of women are a lot of black women are psychology majors. I see it every day. But there's also a lot of black women doing liberal arts courses and stuff like that. So, liberal arts majors. So what's their ideology like? What do you think, you listeners? What do you think that the liberal arts major, female black liberal arts major, do you think a sample size of those folks would be identical to the sample size of these, psychology students? Answer that in the comment section. Further, and why? Right? Further studies on the nationalist position among African Americans should include individuals from a non-student population. Such an endeavor might shed light on other factors that are conducive for one to develop a black nationalist political orientation. Additionally, sampling older and non-student women will provide information about how and at what age a black nationalist orientation is developed. Isn't this what I said a second ago? Let's look at it in high school, post bachelor, post grad education. Let's look at that different age, 50s, 60s, etc. Such an approach may be more apropos given that the findings suggest that both nationalism and self-esteem were related to age, right? So you might just be doing it to do it because it does seem like with age, right, the higher the age, the more nationalistic and higher self-esteem females would have, right? So you might just be doing it just to see, right? And that's fine too. But I prefer you do it to see because I think there is an opportunity to kind of get an estimate on the age, like the minimum age requirement for someone to be, black nationalists, right? And to see how it affects their self-esteem. So I think that's where some of the work should actually look at too. A lifespan approach can address the question of the age at which certain factors contribute to the development of a black nationalist position, and may also help researchers discern what social and environmental forces are more influential at different time periods. So the conclusion. Let's hit the conclusion right after this.
You are listening to the Bitter Medicine Podcast on KWAZ Radio.
This is DAX. You tune into the Harsh Reality Podcast, providing you with social commentary on the news affecting our community, only on KWAZ Radio.
Peace, family. This is Oni, inviting you to listen to the pro-black perspective, where black problems are addressed with black solutions.
You are listening to the Bitter Medicine Podcast on KWAZ Radio. Thanks for listening to the Bitter Medicine Podcast with your host, Koku. If you like what you just heard, we hope you pass along our web address, bittermedicineblogs.com, to your friends and colleagues, and share our show to all your social media. Be sure to check out our archive section on our website for previous podcasts. This has been a KWAZ radio production. Join us next time for another session of the Bitter Medicine Podcast. Follow us on Facebook at Bitter Medicine Show, Twitter, Bitter Meds, Tumblr, Bitter Meds, Instagram, Bitter Medicine.